All right, welcome. Uh, like you said, we're going to talk about webpack today at the conceptual level. So here's an overview. We're going to look at a brief history of build tools. We're going to define the build tool problem space, look at who's using webpack, look at how webpack is different from the other build tools, look at some of the trade-offs, and then some of the main concepts in webpack and how it works. So this is 101 level and conceptual, so you're not gonna walk out of here an expert in webpack unless that's the way you walked in. But you should get a good conceptual foundation that should be helpful. The stat team uses webpack on a couple of its starters, so we do support it. If you need any help, come talk to us. All right, a brief history. Back in 1977. Okay, thank you for the laugh. I appreciate that. So I jest here, but I'm trying to make a point, which is we've had build tools for a really long time. Certainly not web build tools back in 77, but also that we'll probably need build tools for a long time to come, meaning forever. Occasionally a new standard will get released, and I'll be hopeful that we can get rid of the build process in web and make it simpler. And then I look closer at the spec and determine that it ain't happening. We're kind of stuck with the build process forever. Most recently it was HTTP2. I thought, yeah, that's going to get rid of our build process, but no, unfortunately not. Nothing against HTTP2. That's awesome, but it's not going to get rid of the builds. So webpack is a build tool, sometimes also called a bundler, because one of its main tasks is to bundle code together. So let's explore what the build tool problem space is. Automated preparation of source code for deployment and execution. Or in other words, let's get the bits ready to ship. Tools like NPM and Bower they install things, particularly dependencies. So that's not the space that we're talking about. We're talking about getting your code ready to ship. And typically, build tools, you can just automatically associate that with automation because developers equal lazy. So in the web world, it's ideal to have your site represented by a small number of files, like a single HTML file, a single style sheet, a single JavaScript file, and as few other resources as possible. This might be a slight exaggeration or oversimplification, but I think the point is still valid: as few files, as few assets as possible. So does somebody want to tell us why we're targeting that? Less network latency. Okay. Okay. Caching. And why do you cache? Okay. Speed. Okay. Performance. Awesome. Okay. So, but unfortunately, this minimalistic approach, which is good for the browsers, is pretty hostile as a development environment. This, for maintainability, organization, and reuse, and other reasons, we need to separate our code into logical groups. However, this kind of organization is suboptimal for browsers, so we need something to bridge those two extremes, and that's our build tool space right there. Certainly this slide is not complete nor not even actually accurate, but I think it serves its purpose, which is to illustrate that how we organize the code is pretty different from how the browser would like to see it for optimal performance. Okay, so some example build tasks. We run automated tests, combine multiple files together, which is concatenate or bundle. We can make the code small and ugly, which is minify and uglify. We can save the result somewhere, which is to build a deployable artifact if that's needed. And these are in no particular order, but a few of the players, I'll just let you read them, I guess. I won't read every slide to you, but did I miss any? Anybody have like a favorite build tool that I forgot to put up here? I just kind of grabbed as many as I could remember really quickly. Make. Tim's glad for make. Good. What's that? YUI? Broccoli. Okay. Broccoli has 3 users. 4 now, since we did a little marketing for him. All right. So who uses webpack? Okay. All right, let me get a little more specific. Raise your hand if you've used webpack at all. Okay, keep them up. Raise them or keep them up if you've actually configured webpack from scratch or modified a configuration in a project. So it should be similar, pretty similar number of hands. Keep them up if you feel like you can, you're decent. You can make your way around webpack. You can figure it out. Google can help you a little bit. Okay, a few less hands, but that's actually pretty good. I'm glad to see as many hands as I did. Let's see. So it's very popular among React projects. The Create React app is a webpack project, or lays down a webpack project. And Angular uses it, and their Angular CLI lays down a project that uses webpack. And what's kind of interesting is both of those projects, the Angular one, the Angular CLI one, and the Create React app project, they hide the webpack config from you. And if you need to tweak it or disconnect from their control, you do what's called an eject. And I thought that's kind of an interesting way to do it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Has anybody tried either of those starters and ejected to look at the config? Just a couple? A few? Okay. So they've published on their website the people that are making at least $2 monthly donations. So, fools. No, I'm just kidding. And then if they're making $100 or more donation, they're called sponsors. So there's a few of those. My favorite one in there, I don't know if you can see it, but he says, "Shut up and take my money." All right. Webpack is drastically different from the competition, so let's explore how. The first way is that Webpack is the way Webpack bundles. So let's see what that means. In Webpack, everything is a module. So what's a module? So does anybody willing to give me a module definition, kind of a generic or programming specific definition, not a Webpack specific one? Any brave people out there? It shouldn't be too hard, actually. A module. Nobody? Okay. Encapsulable. Did you just coin that word right just now? Okay. That's awesome. Reusable piece of code? Okay. Excellent. So just what those guys said, but in my own words right there. And that definition applies to Webpack, but in Webpack we can be a little bit more specific and say that it's any file referenced by an import or a require asterisk. There's a couple of other ways to get a module in there, but that's the main idea. And here's what that means in the code. So the first one, this code's not mine, it's from a friend of mine, so don't attack it. But the first one looks familiar, right? We're pulling JavaScript into a JavaScript file. But the second one, not so much. Who wants to tell me what the second one's doing? That's why you're here, right? Find out? You don't want to, nobody wants to go out on a limb? Pulling in your CSS, which is weird, right? Isn't that weird? Yes, just go like this. Okay, good. That's weird. And the third one, just as weird, we're pulling an image into our JavaScript. So we'll get into more detail about how Webpack processes these other kinds of assets. But for now, what you need to know is that Webpack will walk the imports. We'll follow those imports. We'll cover it more later, but I don't want anybody stuck on that slide. So you know how sometimes something intrigues you and your thought process start to follow this train, like what does that mean about this and about that, and then you surface like a minute later and you've missed like 10 slides. I don't want anybody to do that. So if you have a question about this weirdness, let's talk about it. Any questions? No, it's just good stuff. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So are you saying that it walks all of the import spaces, like it traverses all of them?
It does. So say the last part again.
Anything like a directory or something that it uses later for some task?
Yeah, it's going to keep track. It's going to build up like a graph of all those dependencies. So it'll walk into the thinginator.js and read the imports that are in there or the requires that are in that file, and then follow those and do it over and over again until it gets all the way to the bottom.
CSS?
What's that?
How about CSS?
CSS 2.
There's images that you have to see in your section.
Yep. Pulls them all in. Reads the whole tree, which is pretty awesome. Any other questions? Kind of a drastic change from what we're used to. All right, and so walks those imports and bundles your stuff. And that's the end of the Webpack. Thank you very much for coming. No, it's not. Okay. So with other bundlers, you provide a globbing pattern for each file type. So you'd say, like ***/star.js and have it go and just blindly grab all the files that match that pattern and bundle them. And Webpack, on the other hand, is bundling based on the relationships that are in your code. So this brings us to difference number 2, which is Webpack builds a dependency graph. We kind of made reference to that already. But while it's walking all those imports, it's going to keep track of them and build that dependency graph. Something like this if you want to visualize it. So if everything comes into your project as a dependency, and Webpack can understand the relationships between your assets in your project, it's kind of it frees up Webpack to do a lot of smart, powerful, intelligent things. And it also models the problem space better, I think.
Smart enough to handle circular dependency.
Yeah, it does. I'm not sure how, but it does. Okay. So with this intelligence and this knowledge, the door is open to all sorts of things, one of which is difference number 3, which is code splitting. Code what? I said code splitting. Liar, you said it was a bundler, now you're saying it's a splitter. So that definitely begs some explanation. Code splitting is the main reason that Webpack was written. The author tried to achieve code splitting in the other tools, and it wasn't reasonable to do it. And so he wrote Webpack. And I think what it comes down to is that they simply didn't have that data, that knowledge that they needed to be able to split the code intelligently. So let's actually define it since I haven't done that yet. Sorry about that. Does anybody want to do it for me? Dang, that is a good definition.
Couldn't say that there yourself.
Couldn't say that, yeah. Yeah, so strategically split your resources into more than one bundle instead of just producing one bundle for each type. You can effectively reduce your payload size, and you can increase browser performance, at least perception-wise, if not effectually, and also, obviously, affect the user experience there too.
So it's better to have multiple files than one big file?
Good question. So let's look at an example. Let's say you have an app or a site that has an admin area and then the rest of the app. and 99% of your users are never going to go into the admin area, just like your 5 admin users, you could split off the admin area into separate bundles, and then they would never ever get loaded for anybody who never navigated there. So that's one use case.
So lazy loading.
Yeah, lazy loading. Thanks. Okay, so there's a couple of types of code splitting. First, you could split out the vendor code into its own bundle, since those don't change as often. So you could get longer caching on those. So, for example, Angular doesn't change as often as you change your code sitting there working on it. Second is on demand for better performance, and that was the example on the previous slide. 2 subtypes there, either route-based or some kind of user interaction. And really that example could have been either, just depending on how you configured it. Any questions about code splitting before we talk about tree shaking?
I'm not sure what you mean by user interaction when you're talking about code splitting.
So
You're saying
like
one element on a page could trigger that lazy loading rather than actually going to a separate area of the site.
yeah, like even just clicking on a button could cause some code to get fetched before it processed it
Okay, got it. Maybe.
via promises. Did you have more to add to that? No. Okay. All right. So next up, third major difference is tree shaking. That was made popular by the rollup library, so this one isn't exclusive to Webpack. But the idea behind tree shaking is to keep the unused code out of the final bundle. So dead code removal, or as Webpack describes it, they say more accurately, live code importing. Which I think is a reference back to walking the tree. If you walk the import tree, anything you import and use is considered live. So
That works on named imports.
say that again.
That works based on named imports.
Okay.
So if you have a giant library with a bunch of named exports, but your app only ever uses one of them, what tree shaking does is remove all those unused parts of that thing that you're importing from.
Yep, we'll actually cover that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I just
that's
saw
all
there
right.
was no down arrow.
Oh, where did it go? Maybe I thought I did. Maybe I lost it. Well, if we don't, let's talk about it again. Okay. Yeah, it actually does look like I lost some stuff. Another thing kind of related to tree shaking that that isn't actually tree shaking is that if you have in Webpack, since you give it a starting point and it walks the imports, if you have just random files in your project, it's not going to pick them up because they're not referenced. And that's not technically tree shaking, but the effect is the same compared to a bundler that globs for star.js. It's going to probably pick up that stray file. So like your test files, you typically have a naming convention on them to make sure your bundler didn't pick them up and put them in your production bundle. Webpack doesn't need that, because if it's not referenced by the import somewhere in your actual code, then it's not going to get picked up. So, and then, yeah. Okay, so why are people choosing Webpack? First and foremost, for those advanced features, I think. Like the code splitting and the tree shaking. Also because it's incredibly configurable. And related to that, with Grunt and Gulp, every project had a different build config. But with Webpack, we found that we rarely touch that config. And so our project configs are the same as each other. Also, Webpack's extensibility through custom loaders and plugins makes it super powerful, and we'll talk more about custom loaders and plugins shortly. And then it turns out that everything is a module philosophy is also developer friendly, in my opinion. So tracing and debugging where you can follow everything through an import is a lot easier. All right, so what are the trade-offs? It takes a long time to crawl, well, relatively long time to crawl those imports and build the dependency graph, so one trade-off is build speed. Also, if your build does more, like tree shaking and code splitting, you can expect longer build times as well. As a reference, a trivial project builds on my box in like 15 to 20 seconds. I've seen larger, more complex projects take over a minute to build. So just a point of reference there. The trade-off for having your build tool know how to process all of your modules, including your images and your styles and your fonts, not just your code, is that there's going to be some additional configuration complexity. So you have to configure the tool to know all that stuff. Weak documentation. Webpack 1 docs were notoriously bad. Hard stop. One reason is because there's so many ways to do things in Webpack, and the documentation, different parts of the documentation would reference different ways to do similar things. So that made it hard. Also, there's a lot of powerful features in Webpack, and I'd say that the power exceeds the ability to quickly and easily document. Webpack 2 docs are getting better. They're definitely better. I still see some to-dos, like one whole feature is like to-do after to-do after to-do, but they're headed in the right direction. However, now that we've got Webpack 1 and 2, you got to make sure that the docs you go to are the right version, and the examples and other resources are the right version, but that's obviously not unique to Webpack, just unique to anything that changes. Unfortunately, we work in the web world, so things don't change very often. So I don't want to dismiss the drawbacks. They're definitely real, and you should consider them. However, I think it's important to note that we're definitely in a complex problem space. Any thoughts or questions before I move on to the main ideas behind Webpack? Okay, enough of the negative things. Let's on to a happier place. Okay, so there's 4 main concepts in Webpack: entry, output, loaders, and plugins. So first, entry. Anybody want to, I realize you're here to learn this, so maybe nobody still wants to go out on a limb here, but anybody want to take a guess at entry? Yep, it's your root JavaScript file. Thank you very much. So instead of globbing patterns like that in gulp, just give them the entry point, and it looks like that in your Webpack config. Any questions? It's one of the simpler of the 4 concepts, maybe only exceeded in simplicity by output. Anybody want to take a guess at output? Yeah, pretty much. So just tell it where to write the output, where to write the bundles. So the config looks like that. You have an output property, you give it a file name and a path. Yeah. Does it uniqueify it? It does. You can configure it to do that. I think it's even on by default. Does anybody know if that's on by default?
My configuration, I think for some magic keys, you can get that turn on.
You put in a string like hash, that turns it into a hash.
That sounds magical. Okay.
Back on the input, are you, instead of the globbing, you're saying that you basically are trying to be more specific about which JavaScript files or which resources you're pulling in. Is that correct? Because you're not trying, the idea is to get away from bundling everything all the time into each. So yeah, putting this gigantic unified thing into one. You're saying this specific file needs these resources. So you're not globbing, you're just calling out each one. Is that the gist of what this is doing there?
So was yours in response to his?
Yeah, isn't this kind of like pointing at where your main is?
Yeah.
So this is saying this is where your project starts.
Yeah.
And then it'll just call from there.
That's correct. So we're not isolating here. This isn't splitting. This is being more surgical about how to find the files. So instead of saying */*star.js, go find them, we're saying, here's my entry point, follow the imports to find all the rest of the code.
Okay, so that then at that entry point is where you're going to specify whatever resources you're going to need there.
Yep.
Rather than saying, yeah, just go get everything from this folder.
Right. Good, very good question. Thank you. Other questions? Thanks for your response too. Okay, where to write the files? I think we left off right there. Just telling it the folder and the file name to put it, where to put a bundle. It's the simplest form, of course, but the basic idea. Any questions on that? Okay. Next concept is loaders. So a loader tells Webpack how to load or process a particular type of file. You can think of tasks in the other build tools. So some example loaders are the Babel loader. And the convention there is they all end in -loader. In the config, you used to be able to reference them without the -loader on the end, but that's going away, so now you need to reference them explicitly, so that'll be nice. I'm trying to read the config. So Babel loader transpiles JavaScript, a CSS loader, and a style loader, which allows CSS to be imported. A file loader, which tells Webpack how to process the static files. And on the next two slides, we're going to look at some example configs. Okay, let's do that now. Here's an example Babel loader config. So on the rules property in our Webpack config, does it help if I point? Let's see. There we go. So in the rules property of our config, we're telling Webpack, we're registering our loaders with Webpack and configuring them at the same time. So we're going to pass an array of rules to Webpack, and each object in the array is a rule. And the first property is the test. This tells Webpack whether a file should be processed by this rule. So in this case, */*. No, I'm just kidding. Anything that ends in a .js should be processed by this rule, but you should exclude anything that you find in the node modules folder. This is common just to JavaScript assets because most things in your node modules folder are already Babel processed. They're already ES5. So you don't want to process them again. That'll just slow down your build a lot. So don't forget that one. And then the use property in the config tells Webpack which loaders to use when it processes, when this rule matches. And then we tell it which loader or loaders. In this case, we're going to run the Babel loader on the .js files. And then you typically need some configuration for a loader, so you do that with the options property. And in this case, we're telling Babel loader which presets to use, particularly env. So questions about loader config, or what the heck a loader is? Because maybe I didn't.
So does that just take the regex during the test?
Yeah, that's a regex in the test. So we're in JavaScript in the config. Other questions about loaders or prior topics? Okay, so let's do another one. The file loader config. The test is a little bit more complicated. We're picking up basically all image types and MPEG on the end. And then we're telling it the loader to use when that rule matches, so the file loader. And then I just left off some config there. Any questions? Any more loader? Well, so let's talk about the file loader a little bit more. The file loader does two things. I just assumed that everybody knew what the Babel loader did. I guess I should maybe mention that. It takes your ES6 plus code and transpiles it down to ES5 or whatever level you configure it to go to. On the file loader, it does two things. First, it places the static file. So let's take a PNG, for example. If it comes across a PNG file, it first places that file into the output directory so that it's ready to be deployed or run. And then wherever you made reference to that PNG in your code, it replaces that reference with the proper HTML path to that resource. So kind of cool. Any questions about that? Any thoughts about that?
All that's doing then, right? The whole thing is just pointed to the right place for file loader? Or is there more to it?
Wait, say that again. Ask the question
Is
again.
that all it's doing is telling it, when you do a reference to one of those files, it just tells it where to point what the path should be?
For this loader type, that's all I know about. Is there any others? Anybody know about anything else this one does?
That way you don't have to type out the path every time and reference the wrong thing.
You get the niceness of a JavaScript reference, and your editor can use its intelligence to do auto completion and stuff like that. Yeah, Jeff?
I think by default, webpack is going to pick up all of the images and files that you have referenced in your code, and will move those and bundle those and everything automatically. I think you use the file loader specifically if you need a file that you don't have referenced directly in your code. So if you're referencing an image using some kind of passed-in value, something that's not if you're referencing it through JavaScript or something like that, but the file isn't directly referenced, then you need the file loader to say, yeah, put this file somewhere where we can reference it.
Is that an additional feature of that loader?
I had to use it for that because you had code, you were referencing a logo based on the language that the person loaded the page in.
Okay, because I'm pretty sure if you reference it, okay, maybe we'll have to dig deeper on that. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think this particular, the loader here,
Yeah.
is just so you can, at the top of the file, import a .png. Like kind of statically define a dependency there. But in other parts of Webpack, you could configure to do some of the things that I think he's talking about.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Other questions? Other thoughts? Yeah.
Is it kind of like Express middleware where the order you place it kind of impacts the way it works?
I don't know.
Order of loaders?
Yeah, is that what you mean? Order of loaders? I'd imagine it processes them in the right order. An array would accommodate that, and I do believe you can have a file match more than one rule. So anybody know otherwise? Anybody know contrary to that? Okay. Other questions? Okay. All right. Plugins allow us to extend the functionality of Webpack, and it's one of the main reasons why Webpack is so powerful. Even the internal functionality of Webpack is built on their own plugin system. And plugins can do anything that a loader can't do. They have access to the full relevant lifecycle that they need access to. They typically modify the bundle as opposed to working on individual files before they're bundled. So for example, the Uglified.js plugin, which minifies JavaScript, that's a plugin. And here's an example config. It's pretty simple considering how powerful it is. You do have to new up your plugin. So we have a plugins, this is our Webpack config again. We have a plugins property in the config. We have to new up our plugin and pass it a config object typically. And it's an array, so you can register multiple plugins. Any questions about plugins? No? All right, let's talk about how Webpack works. So we already talked about an entry, but Webpack takes that file that you specified as the entry point, for example, app/index.js, and it walks all the imports from there. Builds a dependency graph. And it streams each file or module through the matching loaders. It then runs plugins. And then saves the bundle to where you said so in output. So there's the same thing in a workflow diagram. Any questions about that? Any questions about entry? Okay, and then so it takes the entry, so let's say it's client.js. Yeah.
Can you have more than one entry point?
Yeah, you can. What do you think it would be? Anybody who knows what the purpose of having more than one entry point would be? That's what that would be. I think one possible use. I think in our starter, the way we use multiple entry points is to have a backend server and a front end server. There was a hand. Okay. So it walks all the imports, builds a dependency graph, streams the modules through the loaders, runs the plugins, saves the output. Not too bad, but I was hoping it would spark more questions because this is a discussion part. Yeah, all remaining questions, all discussion because I don't have any more slides to say. So yeah, go ahead.
So, is the rules config used for anything other than loaders?
No, that one's. I think that's specific to loaders. Is that true? Anybody know otherwise?
I was just wondering why they didn't call it loaders. I figured since they made it a different name, it was for loaders and some other rules.
I think it used to be called loaders. Did it used to be called loaders?
So they changed it to, and the rules match that test, and then based on the matching test, that those files can go through n number of loaders.
Oh, gotcha. So multiple loaders per rule. Okay.
That's good clarification. Should we pull that config up or are you good?
I got it.
Okay. Anybody else want to see the config on loaders? You do?
Are you trying to buy time? Yeah, I do.
Let's see if I can find it. Actually, and then that's that one topic we were missing some stuff. We can talk about that too. And this isn't like church. We don't have to end at exactly 10:30. We can go whenever we're done. So I'm not really trying to buy time, but I do want to talk about it as much as you guys want to talk about it. Let's see, where was that? That was here. So Babel loader. So under use, which tells webpack what loaders to use, that can be an array of uses, right? Isn't that right? It's an array of uses, right? Not an array of, we wouldn't put the array at loaders, we put the array at uses, I think. Right? There would be an array. Okay, what else? Yeah.
You mentioned you start with, say, your app.js or index.js or whatever, right? Are you loading all your libraries, linking imports to your libraries in there, or
Yep, so let me see if I can find the diagram. Where is it? I can't find it. Jasper made me a really awesome diagram. There. So, like that red one in the middle, it's an NPM package. Yep.
my experience has been you have the libraries and the index that is out.
define the static. So how this would work with webpack is you would still define the static dependency within your application. You import React, you import Angular, whatever the case may be, and then you configure webpack as part of that code splitting process of how you want to deal with those library-based things. You can make them references to CDNs. You can make them a separate custom bundle you have attached to your app, however you want to do it. But just would still, you want to register your static dependencies so it's clear what your app is.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I just went back and looked at my notebook, doc config, just to kind of, because when I set it up, it was just, copy paste out of Google and make it work, right?
Welcome to development.
Yeah, exactly. So my rules is within a module object, and then I also have a resolve object. Any comments on what's going on there with the module object and the resolve object?
Do you want to?
Yeah, the resolve, there's just more configuration there. It's probably not 101 based, but you get with things like paths, different ways of handling it. It's extremely configurable with fault almost.
Yeah, sorry for the oversimplification.
That's all right.
Okay, what else? All right, if nothing else, we'll call it good. Here's the resources slide. Lots of them are to the docs, which I thought are a lot better than they used to be. So that's a lot where I got most of my information from. And I'll post the slides in the video when I get them ready.